He's followed by third baseman Pavensey, who got the night off to start yesterday, although was 0 for 2 as a pinch hitter, and that ended his career-high 8-game hitting streak. Second baseman Brett Boone bats number 5 today. At shortstop, veteran Barry Larkin. In the 6th hole, Eddie Perez, John Nunnally, and David Weathers round out the lineup for Jack McKeon's Cincinnati Reds.
And as you take a look at the Brewers as they stack up defensively this afternoon, Jeff Jenkins gets the start in left field against the right-hander. Jeff Cirillo making his second straight start at first base, still bothered by that sore neck. Loretta at third. The battery this afternoon, Jesse Levis, and on the mound, right-hander Jeff Juden.
Jeff Juden last started at San Francisco back on the 26th of April. He did not factor in the decision, went 5 2/3, and has proven his durability on the mound as he has averaged over 120 pitches in each of his last 2 starts. There's the overall line on Juden: 3-1, 3.48 ERA. Trying to join Scott Karl in becoming the first 2 Brewer starters to get to 4 victories this season. Juden did pitch well his last time out, ran his durability midway through the contest, averaged, endured the grand slam by Barry Bonds, and would in each of his last 2 starts. There's the overall line on Juden. Control was an issue for Juden the last time out as he walked 5 batters at San Francisco. Trying to join Scott Karl. A little overcast in Brewer starters. 4 victories this season. Juden did pitch well as he was last night. 56 degrees and warming as we speak. A bit of the grand slam by Barry Bonds. Overcast in the last out here. There's the overall line on Juden. Control was Harry Wendelstedt calling balls strike out. The umpire's first to third batters. Bruce Francisco, crew chief Frank Pulley, and third base umpire Charlie Williams. A little overcast in Brewer Stadium. 4 victories this season. Juden did pitch well as he was last night. They love everybody and warming as we speak. A bit over grand slam by Barry Bonds. Overcast. There's the overall line. Control was Harry Wendelstedt calling balls that strike out. An Irish umpire first to third out. Bruce
Well, you see the last start from Jeff Juden.
And third base umpire Charlie Williams.
The 26th of April against the Giants on the road. He got a no decision. Didn't pitch all that well. The Brewers staked him to a 6-0 lead early, and as you can see, was not able to get out of the 6th. Only five hits, but he did give up the grand slam, but the walks were a trouble for him. 5 walks in that ball game. The second time that Juden has walked 5 in a game, and as we talked about on the open, Juden averaging almost 5 walks per 9 innings. That's too much.
Well, the Brewers retaining their first place ranking in the National League Central's division just by mere percentage points over red-hot Houston. The win last night putting the Brewers at 17-9. Just a few percentage points over the Astros, who have quietly reeled off a 7-game winning streak to leapfrog over Houston and St. Louis, or rather Chicago and St. Louis in the Central. Chris Steins will lead things off for the Reds this afternoon. Steins, Green, and Young against right-hander Jeff Juden, whose first pitch of the afternoon misses in tight. Steins was 1 for 4 with a walk last night. Off to a good start this year atop that lineup card for Jack McKeon's Reds.
Well, Steins is a pretty good guy to keep off the bases. He's one of the Reds that will take off, and manager Jack McKeon believes in the running game, whether it be the steal or the hit and run. He likes to make things happen.
Two balls and a strike on Chris Steins. There's a shot back up the middle. Vigna to his right does a nice job to get to it. They get the speedy Chris Steins by a half step.
Well, you can't waste a whole lot of time when Steins is running out of the box. The Brewers had him shaded up the middle, and it was a good thing. That's where the ball went. Watch Vigna as he catches the baseball. Takes a little bit more time than he probably should have. Perhaps trying to get the handle, and made it close at first.
One away for Willie Green. 2 for 4 last night against Scott Carlin Company. You know, in all the activity of last night's Brewer win, and there was so much to talk about with Loretta and Cirillo doing such a nice job at third and first respectively. Timely hitting by both of those guys. The big pinch hit by Eric Owens. Somewhere lost in the shuffle was his 6 strong innings by Scott Karl, putting him at a perfect 4-0.
Oh, what a difference a year makes. This time last year, Karl was struggling just to pitch into the 5th inning, 5th and 6th inning, but Karl really has that sinker going this year.
Popped him up. High fly ball on the left side. Rob Deere pop up for Jenkins in left. 2 away.
Oh, we saw a lot of ground balls from Scott Karl with that sinker. You expect strikeouts and fly balls with a guy like Jeff Juden, more of a hard thrower, relies on velocity and that good breaking ball, not so much pinpoint control.
Big Dimitri Young, the batter now. He too was 2 for 4 a night ago. That one's hit well to center field. Grissom back on it, still going back to the track, to the fence. He looks up. Good night now. Big old Dimitri Young with his 2nd of the year, and the Reds have themselves an early 1-0 lead.
Well, pretty much like the game started last night. 2nd inning home run from Brett Boone, and this time Dimitri Young gets all of that one to center field. You can see the reaction of Marquise Grissom after the ball went into the stands. I think he thought he had a chance to catch it. First pitch fastball right down the middle, and you can see the reaction of Jeff Juden. Let's see how close Marquise comes to catching it. Not too far away, was he?
Bad hip and all. Marquise gave that a pretty good ride out there and trying to bring it back. Both home runs by the Reds in this series have come to the deepest part of the yard, straightaway center field. 1-0 Cincinnati. Eddie Taubensee now. Got some pretty good lefty pop in this Reds lineup as it stacks up today with Young and Taubensee in the 3-4 spot.
Anytime you can take Eddie Taubensee out of that lineup, you're doing yourself a big favor. The Reds 0-4 against left-handed pitchers this year, and that's probably one of the reasons. Most of their power and most of their run production comes from the left-handed batters, and a guy throwing left hand is going to neutralize that quite a bit.
Ball and 2 strikes on Eddie Taubensee. Juden from the line. We told you about the Brewers at 17-9. They top that Central Division by percentage points over Houston. The Reds 12-15, 5.5 back. This is a rebuilding year for Cincinnati, and top to bottom they'll tell you the same thing. It's not like we're putting words in anybody's mouth.
Yeah, and the Reds off to a fairly decent start. Nobody expected the Reds to do a whole lot coming out of spring training, and certainly during the offseason. Everybody picked the Reds to be last, but
Taubensee takes a look at a called strike 3. The punch out recorded after the Dimitri Young solo home run. A half inning in the books. Reds on top of the Brewers 1-0. An early 1-0 lead for their 2nd time in as many games in this series. They have that lead before the Brewers can even see the plate. So David Weathers pitching with a 1-run advantage in the bottom of the 1st, and this is how the Brewers will line up under Phil Garner here in the 2nd game of the series this afternoon. Fernando Vina leading the club with a .324 batting average to lead things off. Jeff Cirillo making his 2nd consecutive start at first base, takes the 2-hole. Valentin, Burnitz, and Grissom 3 through 5. Mark Loretta once again at 3rd base, bats number 6. Jeff Jenkins will make his first start at County Stadium in left, batting number 7. Jesse Levis and Jeff Juden round out the lineup for the Brewers.
a couple of changes defensively for the Reds. John Nunley in center field, Eddie Taubensee behind the plate, and on the mound this afternoon, right-hander David Weathers.
David Weathers, right-hander, signed as a free agent by Cincinnati in December of last year. 6'3", 220. 28-year-old right-hander, a veteran of both the American and National Leagues. Started his career with Toronto. He was their 3rd-round draft selection in June of '89. Has since pitched for Florida, the Yankees, Indians,
Hello
and
and
now
welcome
Cincinnati.
to the tutorial on how to use the VLC integration on the tuner plugin. First
You
things
see
first,
that
we
hard
need to make
sinker
sure
that
the
Weathers
VLC
has.
is actually
It's not an
loaded.
overpowering pitcher.
So
Relies on
just
control,
quickly
keeping the
open
ball down in the
VLC,
strike zone.
because tuner
Good
needs
slider
VLC
and a
version
changeup.
3.0 or higher.
got very good
so
control.
If we go under help in VLC,
2-0 on Fernando
you can see
Vina.
I have 3.0.
Make it 3-0.
That's good enough. So now you can also see VLC in
Vina
option
hitless
and
0-4
tab
last
also
night,
here.
but he found 3 ways to reach
If
base
it wasn't
without
loaded, then it would show
collecting
you
a hit.
here that it's quickly loaded, so just quickly look in the logs.
And there's ball
no
4.
walk foul, it would then
Well, just when you
tell
start
me,
talking about a
what went
pitcher
wrong.
having good control
So
and good
over here,
command in
if I
the
look
strike
at
zone,
my
he
log,
walks the first
down
batter on
here
4
it's
pitches. Something Fernando Vina has been able to do quite a bit this year. Well, fans, meet the Brewers during Ohio Casualty Insurance Autograph Fridays. Each week prior to a Friday's game, receive a black and white Brewers picture card and get it autographed. Join 6 to 10 players and Ohio Casualty Insurance every Friday all season long. Call 933-9000.
Jeff Cirillo, the batter now, with Vina aboard to set the table in the bottom of the first. Nando's stolen 5 in 8 attempts this year, and Cirillo takes a strike. David Weathers making his 5th start of the season here this afternoon. His last start came at Shea Stadium against the Mets, and you see the numbers. Pitched brilliantly, 8 innings of shutout baseball, and he worked that afternoon under what would certainly be termed adverse circumstances. Last week he was mourning the loss of his father and told his mother that he would stay home as long as she wanted him there. And his mother quickly responded by saying, you know that if your dad was still around, he'd want you at the ballpark pitching this afternoon, so go out there and win one for your father. And Weathers responded with just a tremendous outing.
Well, events such as that have a different effect on different players, and certainly he responded well to it.
People telling you, hire an editor, hire an editor, hire an editor. That was like the thing to do, hire an editor. And I was like, oh, okay, so if I hire an editor, then I can be like shooting videos and then passing them all the footage, and then while they're editing, I can be working on the next one. That's genius. That's twice as much output. That's so useful. So like that was the first mission. All right, I'm going to find an editor. And, you know, I didn't really have much success with that, but I think what I realized is another part of that octopus analogy, which is some parts of the MKBHD creative process are like one of the hearts, are like not really something that I feel that I can chop off. So the team now is 5, and it is me, Andrew, Vin, Brandon, Michael, and they're all really good at the things that I was like doing with other arms, like the set design and cinematography and motion graphics and management and things I can sort of pass off to be done way better than if I was doing all of it. And I think the last hardest pieces are the creative pieces, like writing, like camera work, and like editing. And so those are a much longer, more deliberate process, but I think eventually those will end up also chopped off. We'll see. We'll see.
Writing is the interesting one I want to ask you about, because I read somewhere that you mentioned you took to video because you were never much of a writer. But it's clear, if you look at your videos, there's some serious writing that goes in to your videos. So what is your trajectory, your path look like as a writer, and how does writing fit into your process?
I feel like writing has become the most inefficient use of my time. It's the thing that I spend the most time on in this job that I have, which is making tech videos. So I'm testing products. I'm putting together all my notes. I'm writing them all down. I'm making the video. I'm editing the video. The writing process for putting together a video takes like an entire day, when the rest of the post-production process also only takes 1 day. All the editing, all the shooting, all the design, all the motion graphics, everything. You know, I was always a pretty mathy person, but now I feel like I'm a professional writer at this point, which is crazy. So yeah, writing is one of the most interesting new hires that we have happening this year, and I'm really excited about who we have joining the team. And I think, you know, not just making review videos, but another thing about tech is videos have a very short tail, which basically is like, you know, how long are you going to watch the iPhone 12 review after it comes out? Maybe about another year, and then that's it. But making those more interesting explainers and those long tail evergreen videos, 5G explained, you know, talking about like why companies do certain things, those are the types of videos I want to be doing more of. And so to be able to do those in between the reviews and have someone helping with writing and research on those things that's exciting to me. I think that'll be pretty big for the channel.
So what does the MKBHD org chart kind of look like, and how does an idea go from
you know, hey, here's an idea, and what is like the process of getting it into? Okay, now it's
in the midst of an 0 for 27.
Yeah, that's a slump,
I would say.
When you talk about a player that missed the majority of the previous season.
0 for 28 as Vigna handles a line drive.
And there's got to be a little.
What's the best way to manage complex processes? Gantt charts. But they suck, which is why Monday.com.
He hit the ball hard, but didn't have anything to show.
The limited edition 12,023 Kurzgesagt calendar is here. Every purchase enables us to make videos free for everyone. So get one for yourself or a loved one and be a sponsor of the following video. Eternal gratitude from us and all the burbs around the world. Here in the Kurzgesagt Labs, we test very important ideas to see what happens when you blow things up or play with black holes. Many of you suggested that we look into an idea that sounds reasonable: shooting nuclear waste into space. It's one of those concepts that seems like an easy fix for one of the main problems with nuclear energy. But it turns out this idea is not just bad, but horribly bad, and it gets worse the longer you think about it. Why is that?
The early strike is very important for you. You've got to stay in front of the count.
What is nuclear waste? Nuclear waste is a fuzzy term and comes in categories which vary from country to country. But in general, there are 3 broad levels. 90% is low-level nuclear waste, tools, gloves, or trash used at a nuclear facility that could be weakly contaminated with some short-lived radioactivity. This stuff is generally safe for normal disposal. 7% is intermediate-level nuclear waste, mostly materials that have been in close proximity to a reactor core long enough to become dangerously radioactive. With proper handling, it's either safely buried or melted down and mixed into glass or concrete and stored deep underground. So 97% of nuclear waste is similar to toxic byproducts from other industries. Not great, not terrible. We can handle it. The remaining 3% is where our problems begin. High-level nuclear waste is very concentrated spent fuel taken out of a reactor core. Formerly uranium, it's now made of various dangerous and often highly radioactive elements. As a bonus, it's also incredibly hot and not easy to handle at all. This is what we want to shoot into space. All in all, around 440 active nuclear reactors create about 11,000 tons of high-level nuclear waste each year. Since 1954, we've accumulated 400,000 tons of dangerous radioactive waste. Most countries are dealing with it by not dealing with it and kicking the can towards the future. Great, so let's launch it into space. According to scientists, space is big, and nobody lives there, so it seems perfect for yeeting away this mess. There are a few tiny problems though. Problem 1, stuff ain't cheap. Even though spaceflight is getting more affordable, it's still extremely expensive. Just to get something into low Earth orbit costs on average about $4,000 per kilogram. Putting that into perspective, it costs about $1,600 to mine, separate and fabricate 1 kilogram of nuclear fuel, so launching waste into space has suddenly made nuclear fuel for reactors way more expensive and greatly increased the cost of the electricity they produce. To launch 1 reactor's worth of nuclear waste would cost at least $100 million per year. To deal with all the 440 operational nuclear power plants' high-level nuclear waste would cost some $44 billion per year for space launch before packaging, transport and security costs are added. Okay, let's pretend we don't care. Currently, we couldn't shoot all the nuclear waste into space even if we wanted to. There just aren't enough rockets. In 2021, we saw a record 135 launches into space. If we repurposed each of those rockets and filled them all with nuclear waste, the total amount that could be lifted into a low Earth orbit, which is the closest orbit above the atmosphere, is nearly 800 tons. We'd need at least 14 times more rockets to handle just today's nuclear waste, let alone get rid of the hundreds of thousands of tons in temporary storage. We would need to create entire new space industries to keep up with the demand for giant, toxic space trash trucks. And it gets worse. Problem 2, space is hard. We only made the calculation for low Earth orbit, where we send most of our rockets and satellites. Littering the space around Earth with thousands of casks of spent nuclear fuel would be a nightmare for space junk management and satellite collision avoidance. Worse still, at this altitude, there's still a little bit of atmosphere causing a tiny bit of drag, so we might have nuclear waste raining down from space within just a few years. Experts would call this a huge problem. Clearly, we have to launch our waste further. If we wanted to send it to, perhaps, the moon, we either need way more rockets or we need to build much bigger ones, making it even more expensive. A single Saturn V, the rocket used by the Apollo program, which cost around $1.5 billion adjusted for inflation per launch, could get about 43.5 tons from the Earth to the moon. So we'd need about 260 Saturn V rocket launches every year. And of course, using the moon as target practice for nuclear waste-tipped rockets kind of makes a huge mess. So maybe don't aim for anything. Space is empty. Do we really need a target? Shooting waste in any random direction is, you guessed it, also a bad idea. Orbits are loops, which means they have a tendency to come back to where they started. Put enough in the sky in random directions, and you'll get one back eventually. So we'd want to launch our nuclear waste deep into space, which means we need even bigger rockets that would be even more expensive. Not that we would be completely safe then. Earth might run into these interplanetary caskets at some time in the far future and experience a pretty meteor shower made from radioactive dust. Okay, how about we shoot it into the sun? Ironically, the sun is pretty hard to hit. While the sun has very strong gravity, everything on Earth is moving with respect to the sun, including the rockets that we launch, meaning a rocket would have to cancel out all the orbital motion it has around the sun so it can stop orbiting and fall in. Because of this, it's actually easier to launch a rocket entirely out of the solar system than it is to launch it into the sun. But to do either of these things, we need even bigger rockets, probably the biggest we've ever built. Nothing works. The thing is, it gets even worse. Problem 3, rockets go brrr. Rocket engineering has taken huge steps since the Apollo era. We've made them relatively safe. We've mostly replaced the toxic explosive cancer fuels of the past decades with much saner mixes of liquid oxygen and hydrogen or kerosene. The newest designs even land themselves so that they can be reused. And yet, out of the 146 launches in 2021, there were 11 failures, which means that a sizable number of our rockets carrying high-level radioactive waste would be exploding on the launch pad, or in the worst case, disassembling at high altitude or crashing from hypersonic speeds. Each failure would be at least equivalent to a mini Chernobyl, but instead of being contained under a slab of concrete, spread throughout the atmosphere. Radioactive particles could make their way to faraway places by riding on the winds. Most would fall into the ocean, but some would land on the inhabited parts of the world. They could cover farmlands and get concentrated into our food or enter our water supply, which is, well, bad. Imagine regular large-scale nuclear disasters happening. People wouldn't be happy. Conclusion and opinion part.
Earlier in the season against Colorado, where the Rockies stole 4 bases against Cincinnati pitching. And Jack McKeon got together with his pitching coach Don Gullett and said, hey, this ain't gonna happen.
Nuclear waste is scary, but the fear of it and horrible ideas like shooting it into space reveals how bad we are at understanding risk. Because the largest amounts of radioactive elements like uranium and radon are actually released by coal. Burning millions of tons of coal each year leaves ash as a waste product that includes about 36,000 tons of radioactive materials. Less radioactive than high-level nuclear waste, but there's also a lot more of it, and it's handled way less carefully. Some of this ash is caught by filters, but most is simply pushed back into leaky mines, shoved into piles exposed. This ash is caught by filters, but most is simply pushed back into leaky mines,